Lars Sullivan is gone from WWE. He was quietly released last month, and WWE still has not said anything publicly. They have not issued any kind of public statement about it. But when approached by Fightful Select, which you can subscribe to on their Patreon, Sullivan actually responded back to their inquiry and confirmed the release. He said that he was surprised WWE didn't announce it themselves. He said that basically keeping things on the down low like this, in his view, they handled the situation with compassion and with honesty. This from Fightful. He said that he told WWE he was done with wrestling after battling horrible anxiety issues. Now, if you remember, the story was that he was in line for a big WrestleMania match a couple of years ago with John Cena. And the night that they were going to shoot the big angle on Raw, where he was going to attack Cena and kick off the feud that would eventually lead to the Mania match, he no-showed. He had horrible anxiety issues. There was another time he was due to work with Brock Lesnar. I don't know if that would have been an extended feud, if that would have been a pay-per-view match, just like, one and done. I don't know, but apparently there was the thought to him working with Brock. And again, there were personal issues that prevented him from doing so. This time around, he had been out for a very long time. He suffered a knee injury. He was going to be out for a number of months. I guess it turned out to be even worse than they originally thought. He had reconstructive knee surgery. It was taking more time for him to recover. And they brought him back this past fall. They brought him back as part of the Smackdown brand. He started blowing through people and laying out Jeff Hardy and all, and I think Riddle, if I remember. And he did those sit-down interviews with Michael Cole, where they were trying to seemingly develop more of his personality. And he told Fightful he enjoyed doing them because they were, in his view, trying to add more depth to his character. That's exactly the reason that I said at the time I liked him. Whether you liked Lars, or you thought he was boring, or you didn't like him on a personal, whatever your opinion was of him, I said, look, if they're going to put this guy on TV, he should be doing more than just coming out and grunting and throwing people down. Let's learn a little bit more about what makes this guy tick. Why does he do the things that he does? It was almost like they were trying to do with him what they did with Mankind, with Mick Foley many years ago, although this was nothing. I mean, those were the best promos WWE ever did. I mean, when I did my whole countdown, right? Remember that, of the top 9 promos in WWE history? That was my number one. It was that whole series of sit-down interviews that, it was one, but they cut it up into different parts over the course of, I think, 4 weeks of Mankind sitting down and doing an interview with Jim Ross, and at the end he attacked him. But this was sort of similar to that, and that's the one thing about it that I liked. And all of a sudden, and he even said, like, the heavy breathing he was doing, that was all a directive from WWE. They wanted him to breathe heavily through his nose. So he talked about that. And then he just suddenly disappeared again off of television, and we never heard from him again. Turns out it was his anxiety again creeping up on him. He said it was so bad that during TV taping days he couldn't eat. He was having trouble sleeping. His father also passed away last year, which was weighing on him, and that made things worse. He admitted that he was his own worst enemy and said that he is very likely done with wrestling. He also took responsibility for what he called his idiocy and his own selfish behavior. You all know the past message board comments he made years ago. I know you do, because I documented them here on the podcast. I did a whole segment on it, and they were completely repulsive. I mean, there's no excuse for them. There's no defending them at all. They were disgusting. And WWE fined him $100,000 for those comments. And he almost certainly was not making $100,000 on his contract at that time. But Fightful heard from wrestlers in the company who said that Lars had approached them personally after all that and went to them to apologize for the comments and, chalked it up to just trolling when he was younger, and that's not who he really is. And look, as far as the anxiety stuff, anxiety issues are no joke. This would have been the second or third time now that this prevented him from coming to TV. At some point, you need to take a step back and realize maybe this just isn't the right job for me. Maybe this isn't so good for my mental health. It sounds like this guy was going through absolute torture. Anxiety issues are a horrible thing. I don't see how WWE could ever trust him again in any kind of a major spot if they couldn't rely on him being there and actually showing up, and that was just TV. What if they had built him up for a big match at WrestleMania over a period of months? So now they get to WrestleMania, they're in a big stadium, and he doesn't show up. These are the sort of things I'm sure WWE must have been thinking about. And it just got to a point where both sides probably realized this is just not going to work out. All that on top of losing a parent. Whatever you may think of the guy, hopefully he can get his issues in check, because I wouldn't wish that on anyone. And Steve Cutler, recently repackaged on Smackdown with Wesley Blake as Baron Corbin's Knights of the Lone Douche, was fired this week by WWE. This was the opposite of the Lars Sullivan stuff, where WWE didn't say anything and they handled it very quietly. WWE put a statement out announcing that they had released Steve Cutler, wished him well in his future endeavors. Later that same day, Deonna Purrazzo, the current Impact Wrestling Knockouts champion and Cutler's girlfriend, revealed the two of them tested positive last month for COVID-19. Cutler tweeted, "Unfortunately, today I was released. It was shocking to say the least, but I am excited about the future and all the possibilities in front of me. Thanks for your continued support. 90 days, the countdown begins." Purrazzo tweeted, "Steve Cutler and I had tested positive for COVID the beginning of January. We had no symptoms, but took all precautions necessary." Per the Observer, it is believed that the positive test stemmed from a New Year's party that they attended, and when Vince McMahon found out about it, he blew a gasket because he had promised people like Roman Reigns and a few other wrestlers. I wouldn't be surprised if Kevin Owens was one of those names. Remember, it was Owens who supposedly gave McMahon the idea of imposing fines on people, for violating certain COVID protocols and such. So I wouldn't be surprised if McMahon had made promises to someone like him as well, because he wasn't out as long as Roman Reigns was, but Kevin Owens did take time away from TV to be with his family and not be in that environment and not be at the performance center. So maybe certain promises and certain assurances were made to him as well before he agreed to come back, because the last thing he wants to do is go to work where other people are not doing what they should be doing. He gets sick and brings it home to his family. Vince McMahon had promised these people a safe work environment when they returned, and now here's somebody going to a party and he's part of the locker room and he's always around other people. Whatever it was, clearly Vince McMahon was angered because they fired Cutler and not Wesley Blake. This was not a cost-cutting measure. This was not, let's get rid of people who were really not doing anything with. I could think of 5 other people who would have been on that list if that were the case. No, it was this one guy who was singled out. And you don't really hear about very many people being fired and just let go like that out of nowhere in WWE these days. Now, last year, they had that whole wave of COVID cuts, which was purely a cost-cutting measure. You'll have a big wave of that every now and then. They call it Black Friday sometimes if it comes at the end of the week, or spring cleaning. It is very rare to hear about somebody just out of nowhere like that, just kind of being released, unless it is some kind of disciplinary issue of some kind. Purrazzo took to Twitter again and had this to say. She said, "We attended a New Year's Eve party like dozens of other people. When Steve tested positive prior to Smackdown, he was sent home and immediately started to quarantine. He was not at work while being positive." So we know they attended a party with dozens of other people. And so when people started tweeting back at her, she said, "But other people still employed did it too." And she put a little thinking face emoji at the end of that. She says, "I was at a party with people who I've spent the entire year, last year with, and who were tested every week. The worst case scenario happened. Once we were aware, we took every precaution to test and quarantine properly. articles insinuating otherwise are false. Listen, when the nature of your job is such that you are frequently in close physical contact like that with other people, you need to use common sense. And if you don't, then there are consequences to those actions, as Mr. Cutler found out this week. But I guess the main issue is, did he or did he not show up for work and potentially infect other people? His girlfriend says no. He got fired for it. So, who knows? Maybe a suspension should have been in order. Maybe one of those fines I was just talking about. I mean, look, that's what other sports leagues do when you break COVID protocols. The question is, what exactly are the COVID protocols in WWE? We know they test. We know they encourage people behind the scenes to wear masks. It was kind of funny a few weeks ago on Raw when the Hurt Business came walking out. And I didn't even notice it at first until people started making fun of him for it on social media. But the Hurt Business walks out on stage. They're all lined up. And Shelton Benjamin is wearing a surgical mask. And then he realizes that he has the mask on his face and he pulls it off and you can see him say, fuck. He stuffs it in his pocket and the other guys are sort of laughing at him as they come to the ring. I wouldn't make fun of him for it. I applaud him for it because he's doing the right thing. Good for him. Good for Shelton. But that's what other leagues do. There are certain penalties that are imposed, but we really don't know what the COVID protocols are in WWE beyond the fact that they test. Do they have other penalties that are very specifically outlined for the talent? Is it just this nebulous thing where you're just expected to not do certain things, but it's not necessarily spelled out in the policy? If there's a policy that's been made public, I sure would love to see it. I'm not aware if there is one or not. I'm going to say, apparently not. I don't think there is. We know in NXT they don't. Not based on some of the photos these dumb shits post on social media down there. But I agree with Deonna on that point, though. You can't have rules for one and not have rules for another. He may have been the unlucky one who tested positive and the others didn't, that we know of. But if there were others that the company were aware of who were there, then you got to punish them too. Hey, what's fair is fair. If there were other WWE people there at the same exact event that he was at and he just got punished for it, then you got to fire them too. There should be no preferential treatment here. I don't care how big of a star you are. Hypothetically, if Rey Mysterio attended the same party with Steve Cutler and WWE found out about it, do you really believe that Vince McMahon would fire Rey Mysterio? Of course not. And that shouldn't be happening. I would agree on that point. If you're going to do that, you got to be fair about it. But as far as this whole situation, look, it sucks for him, but you know what? Human beings are free to make choices in their lives and do whatever they feel they want to do. At the same time, you also work for a big company. And there are consequences to those actions. And Steve Cutler found out the hard way this week.